I am Mario Stevens, a tutor with the Morehouse College Writing Center, and this is a workshop presented by your Morehouse College Writing Center. It is a presentation on works cited in bibliography. So the whole presentation is about citation. And so the first question when we get to talking about works cited pages and bibliographies, it's why do we cite? Why? Why go through the hassle after you finish your work of adding on extra documentation? So the reason that we cite is to maintain academic integrity. In any course within composition and beyond, in any course in which you'll be writing, there's a section on the syllabus dedicated to academic integrity, giving stern warnings against academic or plagiarism. But it's more than avoiding plagiarism by citing your work, right, with in-text citation and of course works cited and having a works cited page. You seek to maintain your own academic integrity. And also you give the reader a chance, the writer gives the reader a chance or a clear distinction between his or her own work, her own ideas as presented in the essay, and the ideas of others. The other reason that we cite is for future research. Considering that you've done some groundbreaking research and you present it in essay form, right? Having a works cited page would give the reader the opportunity to study the sources that you looked at, the primary sources, the secondary sources that support your ideas, giving them a chance to go and look at those sources for themselves. The other reason to cite as it relates to future research is to help the writer. You may at some point want to revisit the research, those documents, those sources that shaped your own thinking about a certain topic. You may want to revisit those, and to have them all organized, well organized in a works cited page would save you the time of having to go and do the same research again. And I think the most important reason, though, when we talk about getting a grade for work is to meet the MLA requirements as outlined in the MLA handbook and MLA style manual, right? So that is the Modern Language Association's handbook and style manual for handling citations. So we've covered why we cite, right? So now we have to focus on when to cite. When should I use a citation? When is it required? And so there are three cases in which you should include an in-text citation followed by the full works cited page in your work. One instance is when you are quoting directly the work of another. You found a quote, an idea, and you can't state it any better in your own words, you pull it directly from that source. And of course, when there is a direct quotation, right, you quote directly, you need an in-text citation, and for every in-text citation, you'll need an entry on your works cited page. You also cite when you summarize. So maybe you've taken the large ideas and condensed those large ideas in a secondary source condensed it for your 4 or 5 page paper. Even in summarizing, you need the citation. You need to give the author, the original author, credit for having done their work, right? And then there's paraphrasing. When you put the author, the original author, the source author's words into your own words, right? Maybe reaching your audience, maybe knowing your audience, you may take a complex idea and rework it to present it within your essay, but that's still the work of another, right? So you certainly need to cite it. And so along with works cited, we'll briefly cover here in-text citation. This is the citation that you give within your essay, within the body of your essay. And here's an example. According to Derek Jensen, author and environmental activist, the term declining baselines describes the process of becoming accustomed to and accepting as normal worsening conditions. And you see the page reference there. There's no author's name there in the parentheses because I've named the author at the beginning of the sentence. And you'll see this in-text citation as a works cited entry later in the presentation. Any questions before we go to how to cite? So the next question is, how do we go about citing? What rules should we follow? What must be included, right? And so documentation style depends on the field of study. There is MLA presented here to you in bold, the Modern Language Association's rules for citations and guidelines for writing, and that's what we use within the English discipline at Morehouse College. But there's also APA, and you probably heard about Chicago Manual or Turabian, right? But we'll focus in this presentation on MLA. So where to cite? Where should the citations go? So we've covered in-text citation, the citations that you give within the body of your essay, the body of your work. But the works cited page comes as its own separate page of the document. It's after the conclusion and it starts on its own separate page. So a note, I've seen students use different processors, online writing processors, virtual processors, and often when you paste from one into another, the paper gets reformatted. And I've seen works cited pages start at the bottom of a conclusion page, the final page of the essay. So at that point, it's up to you to watch out for that. The works cited page should be on its own separate page following the conclusion. One entry on the works cited page for each source cited within the text. So you saw earlier that I quoted Jansen from the Successful College Writing textbook. And so within my works cited page, I will have an entry for Jansen's article within Successful College Writing. Another note is to watch for formatting. Your works cited page should be the same size and font style as the rest of the text. There's no special style that you need to put to it, right? It's simply works cited, unless you only have one work that you've cited in your text. And for one entry in your works cited page, if there's only one entry, it's a works cited page, singular, right? So pay attention to how there's a conclusion page, and then there's a works cited page that starts its own separate page, its own separate part of the full document when doing research. Any questions on where to cite? And we'll talk more about formatting. So MLA style for the works cited page, that's where we are. So this page gives 8 tips, really the 8 rules for MLA style when we get to a works cited page. For one, you list only the sources you cite in your paper. And we'll talk about how this rule is distinct from the bibliography rule, right? But you only list sources that you use in your paper, sources that you've summarized, paraphrased, or quoted directly from. Those are the only types of sources that you will have an entry for on your works cited page. Of course, we've talked about number 2, put the list on a separate page. So the works cited page is a separate page at the end of your document, at the end of your essay. How do you organize the entries on the works cited page? Alphabetize the list by authors' last names. And so you have an example for works with multiple authors, invert only the first author's name. If no author is listed, begin the entry with the title. So you have a work here in the example with 2 authors. The first author listed, of course, the name is inverted, where you have the last name first and then the first name. But then the other author, the name is in order. The first name is first and the last name, of course, is last. The fourth step, the fourth guideline for preparing your works cited page is to capitalize the first word and all other words in a title except a and the 2 coordinating conjunctions and prepositions. And these are the same rules for any time you are typing out a title, right? 5 says italicize or underline the titles of books. So whatever the container is, the term container is all encompassing of books, websites, albums, right? If you want to cite some song, right, that is the container. So you put the smaller work, the article, the song in quotations, but then the container, the book, is italicized. And I know you see underlined there, but the rule is, since you are using processors to do this, you easily italicize the title. Make sure you give inclusive page numbers of articles in periodicals. So if it starts on page 8 and the article ends on page 12, make sure you include that in your works cited entry, right? using P or PP, and you'll see an example of that later. 7, indent the second and all subsequent lines 1/2 inch or 5 spaces. This is the hanging indent style, and you'll see that. Everything following in each entry, every line following the initial line, that first line, should have that hanging indent style. And you'll double space the entire works cited list. And I'll take questions now if there are any questions, but if you don't have any questions, you'll just see the model later. So now we'll talk about formatting common source types. Right, so these are sources that are common to the writing experience within college and even beyond. And so the book is the #1 common source type, right? And so for each entry, for each example, you'll see that the items within each entry, they are color coded. So you will see how they relate, how the model and the example relate. So you have last name, comma, first name, period, title of the book, period. Of course, it's italicized there, period. Publisher, comma, publication date. And you see all of those elements in the example entry there for formatting common source types of the book. So the next common source type is the article in a periodical. The article in a periodical. And so this is when you want to include, maybe there's an article that you read from your favorite magazine. Let's say it's Time Magazine, or in this example, the New Yorker, right? You still want the author's last name first, first name, period, then the article title in quotes, of course, and that is consistent through all of these source types. When you see article, right, you have the periodical title. That's the title of the magazine. The container title is italicized, comma, date, comma, location. And in that example, you'll see Remnick David, and Patriot Games, of course, is in quotes. The New Yorker is italicized, and you have the date and then the location, and you'll see that same way of putting it in the other examples, pages 30 through 35, just as the rules for preparing works cited pages dictates, right? Right there, pages 30 through 35. The next common source type is the film. And anyone, right, is just as well as you can use a book or an article from a periodical, you can include a reference to a film within your work, right? There's a way to do that, right? There's film title in the model, film title, which is italicized, because at that point, that is the completed work. That is the sort of container. So film title, period, director, comma, production company, comma, year of release, period. And so in the example, you have An Inconvenient Truth, which is, of course, the film title, right? Followed by the director's name, directed by Davis Guggenheim. And then, of course, Paramount, the production company Paramount, comma, 2006. But I do want to give you this note, that if in your paper you don't make the direct reference to An Inconvenient Truth or the film title, but you do make direct reference to the director, right? The entry would start with Davis Guggenheim's name, right? And then you would follow with the movie title. So it depends on which you've made reference to within your essay. The next common source type is the article from an electronic database. Your proximity to Woodruff Library and your enrollment within the AUC gives you access to databases, right, through auctr.edu. And so this gives you the opportunity to stay right at your computer and do research rather than going to the library, right? So when you do that, there's a way to cite your resources or the sources that you've engaged through electronic databases. So it's the same, it's very similar, of course, to the earlier entries, but you have author or the editor's last name, comma, first name, and then the article / entry title, right? So it depends on the database that you are in. You'll have the title of the journal, which is that container, which means it should be italicized, and the volume or issue number, then the month or season, comma, page number, then the database, and DOI. DOI. And that's something that's unique to the electronic database, right? That is the direct object identifier that would take the reader directly to that. And so in the example, you have Coles, Kimberly Ann, right? The matter of belief, which is the article, the entry that you have access through the database. The Renaissance Quarterly is the container, it's italicized, and you have the volume and the number for the issue. Then the season, fall 2015, the pages are there, but a little different from earlier, you have JSTOR, right? So you name the database, right? The database is JSTOR, and then you have the DOI following that. The YouTube video. Maybe during your research, you have consulted YouTube and you want to include what you have seen and heard on YouTube in your essay. You can do that, and here's how. And this is good, and I have YouTube as an example because it's so common, but this is for any streaming service that you would use to access a video, right? You include the author or creator's name, right? Period, the video title in quotations, and then YouTube, because this is specific to YouTube, but of course there you would have whatever streaming service you use to access the video, the date of upload, and of course the URL. And so in the example, you have all those elements, the author or creator, the video name, YouTube, the date of upload, and of course the URL. URL is important when you're using web sources because it's a practical concern. It gives the reader direct access to that source, right, through the URL. They can type into their search engine, the search bar, and go directly to the video. So here's an example of an article pulled from Successful College Writing. This is the works cited entry for that earlier in-text citation example from earlier in the presentation, right? So Jensen Derrick, right? So when you're citing from Successful College Writing, it's straightforward. Author's last name, comma, first name, the article title, right? The book title, of course, the editor, publisher, publication date, and location again. So for that earlier in-text citation, I have to include an entry in my works cited page. So here would be the works cited page entry: Jensen, comma, Derrick, Against Forgetting, Where Have All the Animals Gone? Successful College Writing, 8th edition, edited by Kathleen T. McWhorter, and we have the publisher name, 2021, the year of publication, and of course the location, the page 233. So bibliography. So here's the next part of the presentation. Works cited and bibliography are two ways of citing work, giving credit to the references that you engage. But for the bibliography, you include all sources consulted in research. Remember, the rule for the works cited page is to only include entries for texts for authors that you cite directly within the text, within the body of your essay. But for bibliography, you focus on all the works that informed your view for your essay or for whatever work you're publishing. So it's all the works that you've consulted in preparing to present ideas in essay format. So it's the same formatting rules as works cited. So if you master those other formatting styles for all of those common types, you'll have them ready to go for the bibliography. But I want to talk about this type of bibliography because this is the type that I see in use among students at Morehouse, right? It's an assignment. Part of the research that they do requires the annotated bibliography. So the professor may assign an annotated bibliography. And so along with the sources in an annotated bibliography, you have a brief summary for each entry, right? And it's helpful for the student, right? Let's say that you are doing a lot of research, you're reading articles and books. And so by the time you get ready to write, you won't have to go back and look at each individual resource all over again, each individual source all over again. You have access to this one-line summary within an annotated bibliography that tells you exactly what to look for in each entry, right? So here's an example of an entry. You have a similar citation similar to, or formatting similar to the works cited page, but then you have the one line of summary. This article from a periodical aimed at college faculty discusses the way ebooks should change in relation to students' study habits. So that one line explanation is there. And so here's a sample annotated bibliography. Again, there are some common features here. One is the hanging indent style. Notice that after the first line of each entry, there is the hanging indent, right? About 5 spaces over. And then about 5 spaces subordinate to that, you would have the one line summary for the annotated bibliography. So I want to give you a moment to look at that. So that concludes our presentation. If there are any questions, we'll take those questions now.